Okay, this is the listening lecture. And in this listening lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about why it's important to embrace listening and try to improve our skills as listeners. We'll also define listening, talk about how we listen, what that process looks like, how you might personally approach it. Also, we'll look at some challenges to good listening, some poor listening habits, and ways to overcome challenges to listening. All right, so first, let's begin with discussing why exactly it's so important that we would improve as listeners. Listening, for one, tends to make up over 50% of our day-to-day communication activities. So just by sheer quantity and the fact that you do more listening than you do talking, it's important to improve as a listener. College students, for instance, some studies have shown that you spend over 55% of your day in listening activities. And I'm actually surprised that it's that low, considering the fact that you're in classes, listening to lectures, those kinds of things. I would think lecture time would skew you even further. But they say that over 50% of your day is spent in listening. Studies have also shown that people who are viewed as good listeners tend to be people who are viewed as promotable people as well. So if you're interested in succeeding in a career, it's important that you listen. Good listening habits save time and money. If you're ever in a sales position, for instance, it's important that if you're on the phone or face-to-face with a potential client, that you find out exactly which product they need. If you listen to everything else but fail to find out what color they want a product to be, it could end up being that your company is going to pay for shipping to bring a product to yourself, you're going to pay to deliver it to a client, and then when it gets there, your client is going to be upset with you because you didn't bring them what they wanted. And perhaps they'll never do business with you again. If this product needed to be delivered in a timely way, and you end up preventing them from being able to do their job, chances are they won't do business with you anymore. Good listening can save time and money. Good listening can also create opportunities. In life, a lot of your success and failures are going to depend upon who you connect with and network with. So it's important that when you're talking to others, you listen. Really find out what their gifts and passions are. If you're a manager and you find out that you have an employee who absolutely loves technology and has a lot of experience building websites, it'd be much better to put that person to oversee the development of your website than somebody who's never done it and doesn't care to do it. Listening can really open up new opportunities. Listening also strengthens relationships. In communication, there's something known as a narcissistic communicator. And a narcissistic communicator comes from the story of a man named Narcissus. There's variations on this tale, but the most common one is that Narcissus goes to a stream or to a lake. And while he stoops down to get some water, he sees his reflection. And he thinks that he's so handsome and so beautiful that he cannot pull himself away from his own reflection. He's so self-obsessed that he can't get away from himself. And in variations of the tale, sometimes he tries to get so close to himself and then he actually drowns. In other versions of the tale, he spends the rest of his days looking at himself and literally starves himself to death. In communication, a narcissistic communicator is somebody who's so self-focused and so self-obsessed that they will always bring the conversation back to themselves. We just found out that we're going to have a baby in October. You talk to somebody and they immediately say, "Oh, that is great. We found out that we're going to have a baby in October as well, and it's going to be twins." Always bring the conversation back to themselves. We're thinking of getting a new minivan. "Oh, that's great. I'm thinking of getting a minivan too." Immediately bring it back to themselves. Now you should know that sometimes when people are listening and responding in that way, Sometimes all they're trying to do is create a little bit of similarity and show that they actually care. But when it goes to the extreme where every single thing comes back to yourself, or perhaps you're even a one-upper, a narcissistic one-upper, where not only does it come back to myself, but whatever you're doing, I'm doing more of. I'm going to take a trip to Europe. Oh, that's great. We're going to take 2 trips to Europe. A narcissistic one-upper. So it's important to have good listening skills so that you can establish strong relationships. Chances are, if you continue these kind of habits, chances are people are not really going to want to be your friend. But if you can be a person who listens, understands, and begins to know people, you're the type of person that people want to establish strong relationships with. Good listening establishes strong relationships. In your book on page 134, there is a definition for listening. Now, what I really want you to see in this definition, rather than knowing it word for word, is that this definition requires that you process, meaning that you have some kind of control over it. You can be intentional about it. That you can recognize, understand. This means that we actually have to have some kind of internal construction of meaning. We have to accurately interpret the messages that we hear. So this talks about listening as being something that's active. Not something that just passively hits our ears, but something that we're actively engaged in, intentionally engaged in. All right, so how do we listen? The first thing that we need to look at is the actual process of communication. And we're going to cover 5 different points. And I kind of think of these 5 different points, S-A-U-R-R. S-A-U-R-R. If you're a poor listener, you're going to sour your relationships. Sour your relationships. So I think of S-A-U-R-R as a pirate who believes they're going to sour their relationships. S-A-U-R-R. I'm going to sour my relationship unless I have good listening habits. S-A-U-R-R. So the first thing is actually selecting. The fact of the matter is we live in a world that is full of noise. All kinds of people are talking. We have music in the background, televisions that are on. We have to select exactly what we're going to process. There's a huge difference between listening and hearing. Hearing is simply the vibrations of my eardrums. And right now I'm hearing all kinds of things. In the classroom right next door, I think they just lifted a blind and I heard that. But there's all kinds of other sounds that I'm not paying attention to as well. The sound of the air conditioner, the sound of the fan on this projector, etc. Okay, so listening is actually first selecting, finding what it is that you want to listen to. Listening is also attending. So now that you've selected something, let's imagine that you select a friend's voice at a party. Out of all the voices at a party, you're going to listen to this one voice. Now you must also attend to it, to focus forward and listen. So that rather than listening to the clanks, bells, and whistles, and parties and music, you're going to actually really be focused on the words that are being said. And you're going to be intentional about trying to understand, to really get at and get the thing that your friend is saying. So if they said something to you like this, I think we should get out more. You will try to understand that and realize that it means more than we should just go to the movies, things like that. It probably means that they think that either we should strengthen this relationship by spending more time together, or they think that maybe the relationship is diminishing and they don't want it to, so we should spend more time together. Responding is the next thing. So responding is that portion where we not only just process and construct meaning internally, but we actually come back with a statement. So if they say, I think we should spend more time together, you could respond with something that gets at that. You think maybe we have been letting the relationship slip a little lately? You would respond. Or even something as simple, yeah, I agree, man, I've been really missing hanging out with you. Respond. It's something that we actively do. In fact, your listening exercise is about active listening on paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is something that you would actually respond and verbalize. Listening is more than just the receiving and the processing. It's also the responding stage. And then remembering. Remembering is part of listening. How many of you have ever had somebody in your life who ask you, tons of questions. And they appear to just really be just soaking up every single thing that you're saying. And then you see them a day or a week later, and they ask you the exact same questions. So, how are things going? Have you heard what the sex of your baby is yet? And you answer, yes, we're going to have a baby girl. A week later you see them, hey Johnny, so great to see you. So tell me a little bit, what's going on in your life? Have you found out the sex of your baby yet? Yes, we're having a baby girl. And a week later you see them again, hey Johnny, what's the sex? Etc., etc. Remembering is a portion of good listening. It's annoying when you have to answer the same questions to somebody over and over again. You know that they really weren't processing what you said. Now, most of us have a preferred listening style. And it's important for us to begin to identify our preferred listening style, because our preferred listening style is not always the appropriate listening style in every situation. So one style of listening is that people-oriented listening style, where you're really focused on the moods and the feelings of the people that you're talking to. So let's imagine a scenario in which you're with somebody and they say something like this. I really need to sell my house. What you see in there is the mood and feeling of somebody who's perhaps not exactly thrilled by the fact that they need to sell their house. You could respond and say, that must be tough. You probably have a whole lot of memories in that house. That would be a people-oriented listening style where you're getting to the moods and the feelings of what someone says. An action-oriented listening style is more task-oriented, the things that must be done. So the friend says, I really need to sell my house. A task-oriented listener would respond with things like, well, we could actually take some pictures around the house. We could post those online. We could create one of those signs that's out front that actually sends out radio messages when prospective buyers come by, and it describes what the price is, how many rooms there are, when it was built, etc. So that's a task-oriented person where they hear the statement and they immediately think of the things that must be done in order for the selling of the house to be accomplished. A content-oriented person is somebody who tends to look at the statement and critically analyze the statement. So for instance, the friend says, I really need to sell my house. Somebody who's content-oriented would think about that and they would say, do you really think you should be selling your house in this economy right now? Houses are going for dirt cheap. It's definitely a buyer's market. That's a critical thinking, content-oriented listening style. There's also a time-oriented listening style. And that's where the person, these are the kind of people that we're very thankful for in business meetings, because they help business meetings to move forward and not get bogged down in one topic. So for instance, if there were a person who was action-oriented, and they're thinking of all the different tasks we could possibly do to sell the house, and they've been brainstorming for 15 or 20 minutes on all the things we might be able to do. Somebody who is time-oriented would say, okay, it sounds to me like we've got 5 or 6 ideas that are sufficient for us to be able to sell this house. Let's pick the top 5 and move on. A time-oriented person is somebody who's focused on the efficiency of the communication transaction. It's important for you to spend a little time and ask yourself, which of these is my main style? Most of us do shift from different styles depending upon the context, but it's important that we're aware of what our default style is so that we can be more intentional. It would be completely inappropriate to be time-oriented if your friend comes weeping saying, I want to sell my house. Just going and saying, okay, here's the task we need to do, let's move forward, would not be appropriate. A people-oriented orientation at that point in time would be more appropriate. So think about your default personal preference with listening style. There are also different types of listening. Most of you as college students are engaged in informational listening quite often. That's where you go into a lecture, your professor is giving you different terms, different vocabulary, different concepts, different examples, all meant to increase your understanding and knowledge. That's informational listening, where you're there to get the vocabulary, get the understanding, those kinds of things. There's also critical listening. That's the kind of listening that you would engage in if a political candidate were delivering a speech and they were telling you, here's the 4 things I want to accomplish. if you elect me to Senate. You would think about those things critically. Do I really believe that this person means what they say? Do I really believe that it's even possible for this candidate to do what they say? How does the things that they say compare to other candidates that I might vote for? That would be critical thinking, critical listening. Also, we engage quite frequently in appreciative listening. Music, the lyrics in a song, poems, we listen to those, and even comedic routines. So as an example, I'm going to put a classic routine up on the screen right now by Bill Cosby, in which Bill Cosby talks about a visit to the dentist. A comedic routine requires us to listen appreciatively.
Side of your face feels like it's sliding off of your skull, and your bottom lip is in your lap. So the dentist comes back, you want to talk to him. So you say, I beg your pardon? I said it. I don't understand. Do you see my face? What? What's the matter with it? Well, is it any minute? My face is heavy done. Do you see it? This is my bottom lip. It wasn't like this when I came in here. Well, I'll fix it. I heard first. Because you put a needle in my mouth. My face wouldn't take it. My bottom lip is on the floor. So I can't do nothing like this now. I'll fix it. Okay.
So that's an example of appreciative listening, where we actually listen to comedic routines just for pure entertainment value. Another style of listening is empathic listening. This is sort of oriented, once again, to that people-oriented style. An empathic style of listening is, I have a friend who's really big into comic books. And there are certain comic book heroes who have the ability to fly. Certain ones who have super strength or super speed. But there are other comic book heroes who are called empaths. And empaths are people who are able to sense the thoughts, the moods, the feelings of people. So an empath feels the actual emotions of other people. So empathic listening is somebody who's able, really attuned to the way that people are feeling. Empathic listening. All right. Some of the challenges to listening. One is the environment. Sometimes you'll hold a morning meeting that's talking about all the tasks that need to be done. And if you're a construction worker, you'll hold these morning meetings in a construction zone. So your boss is talking to you, and outside of the window, heavy equipment is running. Diesel engines are out there growling in the yard, those kinds of things. The environment can be an obstacle. For some people in classrooms, air conditioning vents cause them to not be able to hear the fans of the PowerPoint projectors, etc. So the environment itself can be a challenge to good listening. Others of us, for instance, a lot of us have grandparents who, because of their age, have ears that are diminishing in their quality of hearing. So if you go out to dinner sometimes with your grandparents, you find that they're not really able to communicate with you to the same degree that they would at home in the front room. And a lot of times that's because there's banging dishes in the kitchen. Those kinds of things keep them from being able to hear clearly. Myself, I spent 4 years in the Air Force next to F-16s, jet engines, and I found that my hearing is not nearly as good now as it was before I entered the Air Force. So sometimes there are biological factors, things that are physically going on in our bodies that keep us from being able to hear. I know this will surprise many of you, because many of you are thoroughly convinced that when you multitask, you're a better listener than when you don't. Some of you thoroughly believe that you're able to read your textbook while glancing occasionally at the television screen to see the recent scores on ESPN. You can listen to Metallica off in the distance. You can receive texts from your husband or your wife while you're doing all this. You can be posting on Facebook and thinking about how you're going to get the kids to the soccer game tomorrow. And you can do all of these things without any diminishment in your intellectual capacity to process information. Studies have shown that this is not the case at all. When you can focus more on one thing at a time, instead of multitasking, trying to do 100 things at once, studies have shown that your retention, your ability to listen, your ability to process data increases dramatically. Boredom can be a huge cause of poor listening. And this can be a problem because, like I've said before, even if a lecture is pretty doggone interesting, it's easy to start being a little bit bored. And we've all had teachers in the past who do deliver lectures that are just hard to track and follow with. So boredom can keep you from listening, where you'll actually check out of the conversation. On the opposite end, though, overexcitement can also keep you from being a good listener. If you're going through the hallway and you're on your way to start your 4-day weekend, you've got all your papers written, you've done all your reading, and you know this is a free 4-day weekend. While you're proceeding down the hallway, a friend comes up to you and says hello. You don't really want to talk to this friend right now because you're so excited about getting to some other place. Or in the course of a lecture, you're very, very excited about something that's going on in your personal life. These things can cause you to check out of a conversation and be a poor listener. Your attitude has a huge influence on the way that you listen. I said on one of the first days of class that one of the obstacles I have to overcome as a communication teacher is the fact that some of you come into class on the first day and you think, I'm a good communicator, I know it all, this should be an easy class. Your attitude of, I know it all, I've got nothing to learn. Sometimes that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you've got nothing to learn, often you'll learn nothing. But if you come in with an attitude of, I think I need to grow. I think there's areas for improvement. I think there's things I do not know. Many times that attitude itself can cause you to be a better listener. Psychological factors can also keep you from being a good listener. So for instance, in the movie Back to the Future, Marty McFly had something that's known as a trigger word. When you call somebody this thing, or imply that they're this thing, it's a trigger for them that causes them to check out of the conversation and no longer listen. For Marty McFly, that word was coward, yellow, scaredy cat. When somebody would accuse him of that, he was ready to fight, ready to brawl, ready to stop doing anything that made sense because it was a trigger word for him. So sometimes we have psychological factors inside that keep us from actually listening. Certain topics, we'll be listening to persuasive speeches later in this semester. And there are certain topics that for some of you, as soon as you hear them, it just sets you off. I advise that as a student, you have the common decency and respect to listen to other people's opinions. That's one reason why I love this class. I think it challenges our way of thinking. Even if it doesn't change the way we think, it will probably sharpen the way that you think. So I advise you to listen as best as you possibly can, even to topics you find offensive. So that in the past I have had students who've come forward and they've proposed things, for instance, like pro-gay marriage legislation. Now in the state of Idaho, that has hardly taken root up here. And I had one student that as soon as it became pretty obvious that gay marriage legislation is what this speech was going to be about, they immediately stood up and walked out of the class. Now just know you always have the freedom to leave the class in a speech if you feel it's not a welcome and safe environment for you. But the idea here is to actually embrace a little bit of challenge to our thinking. So psychological factors can cause us to check out. And this person literally checked out of the room. Psychological things can keep us from listening. Sometimes we have information overload. And this is a problem in academia. When you come into class, I mean, even right now, I don't know, we're 15 minutes or so into this lecture, maybe 20, and I've given you so many concepts in a short period of time. And this is one reason why I make the lectures available later, the PowerPoints available later, the actual lectures themselves, etc., available later. because I realize this is a lot of information in a short time, and a lot of us just need to hear it a second time at a slower pace. On a video, we can pause and rewind, etc. So information overload. Information complexity. Perhaps on the video camera this doesn't show up, but there's many different buttons, bells, and whistles that are on this. It'll show up on your PowerPoint if you download that later. But information overload is when something, complexity is when something's just so complex. Stephen Hawking's explaining the expansion of the universe, the nature of black holes, quantum physics, those kinds of things. They're so incredibly complex it makes it hard to listen. Also in your speeches, some of you are going to be expert in certain areas on informative speeches. When you come forward and start using a whole lot of jargon, like in the military, I might say something like this. I was TDY and I went to the BX. For most people, that means nothing. It's overly complicated. If I were to say I was on temporary duty in Kuwait and I went to the store, which we call a base exchange, that would be something that's meaningful to people. So define your jargon over the course of your speech. Listening rate is another problem for communication. And this is a problem because the fact of the matter is we can listen 2 to 3 times faster than most people talk. And you would think that this would actually be helpful for you as a listener, because now that means you have plenty of time to keep up with the things that are being said, but it actually isn't. Most of the time, the fact that we can listen faster than people talk, it gives us mental downtime. And it gives us that opportunity to go visit the beach, is what I call it. Whenever you get distracted and you're no longer listening to the lecture, you're imagining what it would be like to be at the beach or going shopping, those kinds of things. Because we can hear faster than people talk, it gives us mental downtime and a chance to visit the beach. Also, there are different things that we do that make us poor listeners, and some of us do these way too frequently. One of these is a style of listening that's known as defensive listening. This is somebody who's always finding a way to be offended by something you say, to always believe that you must mean something more than what you really even meant to say. So a defensive listener might, for instance, if a boss comes up and says, I've been noticing lately that your work has been excellent. They would immediately be defensive and say, what, my work wasn't good before? What have I been doing wrong? You always complain about my work. The boss said, I've been noticing lately. Meaning perhaps the boss didn't notice before. Maybe the boss is saying, you know what? I should have been paying closer attention because you're doing great work. It doesn't mean that necessarily that the boss is saying, lately you've been doing good work, whereas prior to my comment you weren't. So defensive listeners always find a way to take something bad. You look really nice today. What? You don't like the way I normally dress? Defensive listening, where you'll always see the negative in something. Selective listening. This is somebody who always takes something, like when people say they focus in only on the negative. So for instance, on selective listening, I had a student last semester who, when it came time to fill out the reviews, the only thing that they said on the reviews was they hated the fact that they had to end their speeches with a rhyme. Selective listening. As many of you know, in my lectures, I see a rhyme as a very, very easy and clear way to send a signal to your classmates that your speech is over. But I have in this semester, and I always have said, there are other opportunities to end a speech. Antithesis, parallelism, chiasmus, quotations, etc. But the student focused in only on the one thing that I've said, selective listening, and ignored everything else. So sometimes, for instance, if you have a negative opinion of somebody, even if what they say is a good thing, you're immediately going to spin it into something bad. That's selective listening. And pseudo-listening is something that we very commonly engage in. So sometimes you might have that relative who you get on the phone with who's very, very talkative, uses a lot of words, and you're not necessarily in the mood to listen. So what do? You sit there with the phone by your ear while you're really surfing the internet or watching TV, and you just go, uh-huh, yeah, oh, 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 oh. You do pseudo-listening where you're not really interacting with the person. You're just making noises and utterances to convey as if you are really listening. pseudo-listening. All right. So now that we've talked about some of the challenges, it's important for you as communicators to have some strategies to become better listeners. One thing that you can immediately do is be a better receiver. So, for instance, if you find that you're having a problem with being focused, particularly in lectures and classrooms, be prepared. Try to come into the class where you've had good rest, where you're not hungry. And if you are hungry, bring a snack in, those kinds of things, so that you can focus physically in the course of your presentation. Be prepared to be a good listener. Be intentional. Stay focused. I've suggested to many of you that one way you can improve as a listener is while you're listening to lectures, doodle. Draw things, directed doodling, that might have something to do with the lecture. So for instance, when I say the word focus, draw some cheesy little binoculars or a telescope or a target that you are focusing in on, etc. Draw directed doodling. Stay focused. Be participating in the lecture and don't go to the beach. Postpone your responses. This is one of the most common ways that listening goes wrong. Somebody's halfway through a sentence, you cut them off as if they were going to say something that they never even intended to say. So I was thinking this weekend we should go. I don't want to go anywhere. I've been so busy this week, all I want to do is listening. Well, if you'd let the person finish, maybe what you would have heard was, I was thinking this weekend, maybe we should just go home and stay there the whole time. Postpone your response. Listen. Hear somebody all the way through. Now that's the receiving stage. Another way that you can improve is the constructing meaning stage. So while you're internalizing the things that people say, try to think from the other person's point of view. So for instance, if a trigger word for you is girl, that's a trigger word for my sister. She hates being called girl. And this was a problem when I was growing up because my grandma was from Kentucky. And in Kentucky, young ladies, young women, doesn't matter what your age is, you're called girl. Oh, girl, you've got to be kidding me. So this was a trigger word for my sister. And it caused a lot of tension between the two. But if you can be flexible in constructing meaning and say to yourself, well, this person doesn't really mean to offend me. Or perhaps gently say, you know what, I know you don't mean anything by it, but the word girl is just really insulting to me. Do you think you could call me something else, maybe even by my first name? Try to think from the other person's point of view. Give them some credit. Don't always think that people are attacking you. Don't think bad about people. Yes, there are people in the world who are just always negative. Always find the bad in anything, who are always trying to tear you down. My first advice is try to get away from those people. But if you must be around them, try to find the good in the sentence. Focus on the content and don't let it destroy you. Control your emotions. An emotional part of a message is very important. But in the course of processing information, you need to allay and delay your emotional response. And instead, focus in on the mental part and think your way critically as you're constructing the meaning. In the responding stage of communication, that's where you come back and you're actually talking to somebody. In the responding stage of listening, first thing that you can do is actually take some notes. So while you're listening, take notes and respond. And maybe even say to somebody afterwards, well, this is what I think I heard. Take some notes. And of course, taking notes doesn't work in every situation. It'd be totally weird for you when a friend comes up and starts telling you about their weekend for you to break out a little notepad and start making notes. But in classroom environments, things like that. Ask clarifying questions. So if somebody says to you, I've been noticing that you've been much lazier at work lately. A clarifying question would be something like this. What does my behavior look like when I'm lazy? Well, I've been noticing lately you haven't been wearing as many buttons at work. Now you have an opportunity to decide something. Either to start putting more buttons on your shirt because that makes other people think that you're hardworking, passionate, spirited, whatever the case may be, or simply decide that this is not a high priority for you. If other people think you're lazy simply because you're not wearing a whole bunch of buttons on your vests, then so be it. Ask clarifying questions. Send active signals to people. If there's something they've said that you don't understand, be intentional about your nonverbals. Those kinds of things. If it's something you're really interested in, send nonverbal signals that help people to know, and manage the conversation through your nonverbals. And your exercise, listening exercise, is about paraphrasing. And remember, paraphrasing is not restating word for word the thing that the person just told you. It's getting at the heart of the matter. And sometimes it's not even going to be focused on the content. Sometimes you can paraphrase people's emotions. I need to sell my house. Looks to me like you're really upset about that. Or I need to sell my house. So are your finances really in bad shape right now? Paraphrase the things that are said. Simplify and condense the things that are said. Okay, so after the responding stage is that important other stage of actually remembering, retaining that data. This is particularly important in academic listening or informational listening. So one thing that you can do to help yourself remember is, number one, care. If somebody's talking about you, if you genuinely care about the person, most of the time you'll remember. So don't fake like you care. Don't do the pseudo-listening thing. Try to conjure up genuine compassion and empathy for somebody. Care enough about the conversation to be actively involved. If you do that, that's the first good step in helping you to remember information. Have that attitude of, I need to learn. I care about this subject. If you have that, it will help you to remember. The other thing is intentionally review. Studies have shown that if students would make just one simple change to the way that they approach their classes, that one simple change could revolutionize the amount of content that they can remember. And that is simply this. In class, when you're taking notes, once you're done, you spend 15, 20, 30 minutes away from the class, you should reopen up your notes and look at what you've written. Ask yourself, what did I learn in class today? And then you would review those notes once again 15 to 30 minutes before you enter that class the next time. Simply taking the notes, reviewing the notes after, and then reviewing the notes before you step into the class the next time can really increase the amount of memory that you have about lectures. And this can also help in interpersonal relationships. Sales calls. Take some notes on the sales calls. Review those notes later. Review those notes once again before you go to meet that client or call that client again. People will really be impressed by how much information you've retained. So review. This can help you to overcome the challenge. Now, your listening exercise is something that I think is one of the most important exercises you'll do over the course of the semester. So please read those notes. I've been very specific about the things that I do and do not want to see on your papers. The big thing is, if you fail the first time at using paraphrasing appropriately, you find that it has no benefit whatsoever, don't write me a paper on how paraphrasing doesn't work. If you use paraphrasing correctly, it's inevitable that it will help to elucidate more meaning in a conversation and establish more empathy, establish a deeper connection between you and another person. But the problem is, a lot of times when we first use a technique, we misuse it. So you'll start to paraphrase simple things like, somebody says to you, I'm thinking of getting a cheeseburger after class. And you paraphrase exactly. So what you're thinking of doing is going to get a cheeseburger after class? That's annoying. All right? It's not true paraphrasing. All right? So experiment with it and use it until you actually find that there's some benefits, and then answer those questions specifically. And this concludes our listening lecture.